my friends. Hello, and a very, very good morning to you, and welcome to another Mr. Dilly Meets. I'm Mr. Dilly, of course, and today, welcome to another feast of creativity and writing and inspiration, some joy, some laughter, all the good things in life. As today we celebrate, two things really. One of them in 2 weeks' time, we have Empathy Day, of course, and we'll be talking to some of the Read for Empathy authors a bit later on in the show. But before that, we have a wonderful guest coming up. SF Syed talking about his latest book coming out in paperback later this year, Tyger, of course, which is a wonderful read. And we'll be talking to the man himself in just a moment. Anyway, half-term fast approaches, the sun is shining, and we have another Mr. Dilly Meets. What more could you ask for? So how it's going to work is we're going to speak to my first guest. We're going to hear about all of him and about his wonderful book and about his influences, inspirations. We have some of your questions. Many questions have been sent in to put towards the man himself. And then the later part of the show, we'll be going to all our other guests. And at the end of the show, we'll have a panel with SF Syed and the Empathy authors all together talking about Empathy Day, of course. So with much further ado, or no further ado, shall we put our hands together? I think we should, for Mr. SF Syed. There we go. Round of applause, sir. How are you? Nice to meet you.
So much.
Lovely to have you on the show, and thanks for joining us. It's a real pleasure to have you on. And first of all, may I wish you huge congratulations. Was it last week the Children's Book of the Year award? How does that feel?
Yeah, British Book Awards, Children's Book of the Year, Tyger, unbelievable. It took me 9 years to write that book. I'm not somebody who finds writing easy, but when a thing like that happens, all the hard work feels more than worthwhile.
Was there kind of when you write a book, people get asked, it's like when they when they make a hit song, or when they make a film or something like that. Do you have a feeling that this could be something when you're writing it, or do you just think, well, if it connects, it will? How did you feel about it when you were writing it?
Well, with every book I do, I always do everything I possibly can to make it the very, very best book it can possibly be. It's always my ambition as a writer to do that. And I feel like, well, that's why it takes me so long, because I go through it again and again. I do many, many drafts. When I started out trying to write, I didn't know about drafts. Nobody had ever talked to me about that stuff when I was at school. I thought writers just wrote a book and that was it. But no, it turns out all of us, stories are too complicated. You have to build them over a number of stages. We call those stages drafts. So with Tyger, I did 19. I went through that story.
I just want to interrupt you there. Because I did read about that sort of redraft. You did 19 drafts.
Again and again and again.
You said that I want to. Sorry, go on. Yeah, you're gone.
Yeah, that's why it took 9 years. So yeah, I mean, I'm always hoping that this is going to be a book that everybody is going to read, everybody is going to love, whoever you are, however old you are, whatever kind of story you think you like, you will find something to enjoy in my work. But you just don't know, you really don't know. So you hope, you give it everything you've got, and then it goes out into the world. And whenever you hear from anybody that they've enjoyed it, it makes all the hard work worthwhile. But obviously when it wins like a prize, it's like extra exciting.
It's nice to get a prize. Because that was one of the things about that process was just the fact that you said about the drafts and stuff, but this is something you said on another interview thing, but which is quite an interesting way of approaching it, is that you write it and then come back to it as if you're going to pay $12.99 for it as a book, and would you buy it? And you go, absolutely not. And then you do it when you rewrite them. Is it literally, does it take on a whole new shape, or is it just sort of character journeys change, or sort of structures change, or everything changes? How does that kind of come about when you go back to these drafts?
Well, it's different with each one. I made a resource for the British Library website sharing pages from 7 different drafts of my first book, Varjak Poor, which some of you guys might know. And you might be amazed at how much has changed. Even more change in the process of writing Tyger. This is a story that is set in London in the present day, in the 21st century right now, but not our world. It's set in a strange alternate world where history has gone very, very differently. The story of Tyger was always set in an alternate world, but it wasn't always this one. It's been through 3 different worlds, and in each one, the main character has changed quite a lot. The story has changed a lot. The one thing that has stayed the same from the very first draft is the Tyger. The Tyger has always been there. But everything around the Tyger changed and changed and changed again. And as you say, my process really comes down to I do the very best I can, then I put it away, I go off and read loads of other books, then I come back and read my one, but I pretend I didn't write it. I pretend somebody else wrote it.
That's always a good idea about doing that. You say about the world and stuff. If you can give us a little brief synopsis, because we'll talk about that in a minute, sort of your influences and sort of inspirations and stuff. But one of them, I was talking to, was it last show before last, Mr. Dilly Meets before last, we had Philip Reeve on the show, and he was talking about in his books and that sort of world building part of his books and how he approaches that. So in terms of your ideas and inspirations and stuff, you very much do create a world that is our world, but is a very separate world as well, and it has its own sort of mythology to it, really, in terms of that. Can you just give us an idea of the story of Tyger, and then we talk a little bit more about that kind of world building stuff and how you kind of approach that? If that's okay, just give us a little bit of a synopsis about what the book's about. That'd be great. Thank you.
Sure. Well, as I say, it's set in a strange alternate world where history has gone very, very differently. And in the world of Tyger, right now, the British Empire has never ended. It's still going. Slavery was never abolished. It's still going right now. And huge numbers of animals have been hunted to extinction. There are almost no animals left at all in that world, certainly no tigers. And yet, it is in that world that a boy called Adam and a girl called Zadie have an encounter with this mysterious, mythical, magical animal known only as Tyger. So it's a story on one level. It's a really simple story about a boy and a girl and a tiger. And on other levels, it's about everything. It's about other worlds. It's about what we have inside us, the power to change the world. I believe every single one of us has the power to change the world. So it's a book that I hope will excite you and thrill you. You won't be able to stop reading it. It's meant to be page-turning adventure, but I hope it will also fill your mind with big ideas and questions, and maybe you might come away from it looking at our own world differently. Maybe you might come away from it asking, how could this be different? And how could we make it different? Because I believe we can all do that. And
that actually will take that thought, because that leads into obviously what the discussion we're going to have excuse me, later on with yourself and the other authors join us later on about empathy and the power of stories to actually, and books and reading to actually do that. The mythology you kind of create. I mean, it's almost. I don't know if this is something you're thinking about or not, but it's almost it's such a complete world in itself. It looks like you could have many more sort of adventures within that world and those characters in different ways. Your inspirations for that in the first place. I mean, you tell me what a couple of the inspirations you have, and then if I may, I just want to talk about what that means to me, because a couple of those inspirations meant a lot to me as a child as well. So what were those inspirations, specifically a certain painter and poet himself, I think, in that. So if you tell us a little bit about that, and then we'll come back and have a chat.
Well, if you're very observant, you will have noticed that Tyger is spelt with a Y, Tyger. And the reason for that is it is inspired by one of the biggest inspirations, my favorite poem of all time. When I was at school myself, we read this poem in class. The poem is called The Tyger, and it's by a poet and artist called William Blake. Here it is, The Tyger. It starts, Tyger, Tyger, burning bright in the forests of the night. If you've ever heard those lines, you'll know what I'm talking about. If you haven't, you should totally look it up. Amazing poem about a tiger, but I think it's about many other things too, including the idea of infinity. William Blake was really interested in this idea of infinity, and I am too. And I particularly love the idea that we now have in science that there could be an infinite number of parallel worlds. This world is not the only version of the world that exists. And in each world, history goes differently. And therefore, you and I would be different too, because we'd be in different worlds. So some of the other things that have inspired Tyger are books that have explored that idea. So perhaps some of you might have come across Philip Pullman's His Dark Materials books. The first one was Northern Lights. then The Subtle Knife. They are set in worlds where history has gone differently. Mallory Blackman's Noughts and Crosses, an amazing sequence of books, again, that try to imagine a different history for the world. I just love that idea. And if there really could be an infinite number of worlds, there could be an infinite number of stories set in those worlds too. So I've always wanted to do a story about that, try and explore that idea. And Tyger, well, it's my attempt to do one of those.
Well, it does. It's very interesting because when I first heard about your book and obviously the spelling, I immediately thought William Blake because of the poem. And just to show everyone here, I don't think it comes up at the front of my screen, but this is slightly weird, the green screen. This is an old, battered, slightly paint-worn William Blake book that my father had when I was younger, and I picked it up and I used to draw and paint, hence the paint on the cover. I was always delighted about that. Pictures from that, and one of those pictures actually, I think you mentioned, because it's not the same version, but it is a character in the book. So, so here we have, this is the Ancient of Days on the left, isn't it? Which is quite a famous picture, and then Tyger on the right. And in your book, these are the sort of, they're not the same versions in Blake's, but these are kind of the enemies against each other. How is so the character on the left? It's not the same in your book, but is Urizen? How do you say that?
Nobody really knows. I mean, William Blake made that character up, and he named him. Some people pronounce it Urizen, as you're saying. Some people say Urizen or Urizen. I mean, you know, it's totally, nobody knows. Only William Blake knows. So I think we're allowed to say it.
Some people call him God.
People often think it's an image of God. It's not. It's not. It's an image of this character, Urizen or Urizen. And he's not creating anything. He's actually limiting things. It's a really interesting mythology. William Blake invented his own mythology. You know, it has roots in all the ancient mythologies he was interested in, like ancient Greek mythology, for example. But he's kind of made up his whole mythic system. And I just love that. And you can read that in his poetry. And it turns out, you know, a lot of my favorite authors have also invented their own mythology. So another thing I wanted to do with Tyger was to invent my own mythology. And it is inspired by Blake's and by the older systems Blake himself was inspired by. But I think I've kind of made it my own. And another thing, I would love it if readers were to come away from Tyger feeling that they too can invent their own mythology. Everybody can do this. I think it's actually a kind of awesome thing to do. So if anyone,
it's so rich, the world of that, isn't it? What you can do. There's, I don't know if some of this might be too old for some of the kids watching, but there's an amazing author, but there are some accessible versions of his work called Joseph Campbell, who was an amazing sort of lecturer, university lecturer many years ago. But he looked at all the mythologies, all the stories of the world, and he collected them all together and wrote all these amazing things about them. And you begin to see all these wonderful patterns and different figures that appear, but you know, different faces, but sort of same sort of ideas. And so there's such a huge amount to draw on, apart from just the sort of like the Greeks and the Egyptians and some of the stuff you get to know in school. But there's a massive amount, isn't it? And it's absolutely fascinating. I don't want to do. I'm going to put some questions here. We've got a lot of questions from kids for you sent in prior to the show, so we're going to have a look at some of them. And then after that, we're going to have a short reading from Tyger, and then we get back and ask a few more questions, because as you can imagine, we have an absolute pile of them.
Right.
Some of them cover some of the things you just mentioned, but I'll might be able to add something to it. And all the schools like a shout out anyway. So this is the first up. So this is Willowdown Primary School, Bridgewater, Lark Rise Academy, Dunstable, Smitham Primary School, Colston, and Simpson Lane Academy, Nottingley. All want to know what inspired you to write Tyger, which you kind of covered, but anything else you'd like to add to that?
Oh, well, first of all, thank you so much for your question. And thanks for joining us today. I mean, Tyger has many inspirations. I've talked about some of them already. But another one that I haven't talked about, which is probably the biggest one, is tigers themselves. I absolutely love tigers. I've always really loved tigers. I just think they're amazing. I love all cats. You know, I mean, my first book, Barjackpaw, is a book about a cat learning a secret martial art known only to cats. It was inspired by my own cat's adventures. I think in their minds, all cats kind of believe they are tigers. They believe they are really big, fearsome, powerful, mighty warrior cats, you know. So to me, the tiger is kind of the ultimate form of a cat. I guess if I could be any animal, I would totally be a tiger. But I should say the Tyger in Tyger is not just a tiger. It's kind of also something else. Maybe a kind of being that can cross between worlds and dimensions. So, you know, between tigers themselves, all the mythologies we've been talking about, the science of parallel worlds, you know, all of these things have kind of swirled together into Tyger. And there are loads of other things I could talk about too, but let's move on and have another question. Maybe
this actually covers what you said, but I'm just going to do it just because I can give the schools a shout out and they can all jump up and down in their classrooms. So this is Widewell Primary School, Plymouth, Penticliff Primary, Dunfermline in Scotland, Twickenham Primary Academy, London. Why did you choose a tiger to be the creature rather than a different animal? You kind of covered that, but thank you very much for your questions, everybody. This is kind of goes to the William Blake question. Flimby Primary School, Cumbria, and Scoil, I'm going to pronounce this really wrongly, Alby Cells in Ireland. Why did you choose to spell tiger with a Y? I presume that's directly linked to the Tiger poem in terms of...
Well, absolutely. I mean, well, number one, because it's inspired by the William Blake poem, I had to spell it tiger. But I think also spelling it like that kind of shows you maybe this is not exactly a tiger as we know tigers, maybe something a little more. Also, maybe it kind of begins to show you, you know, this might not be our world, you know, spelling tiger differently. Maybe it's happening in a slightly different world. And there are lots of ways I want to show you that in the book. And I think that is one of them too. So I'm really glad that you guys asked me about that question. I just want to go back to the last question. Just say that I believe deep down, all writers, all of us, we are really just readers who take one more step and write stories we want to read ourselves. That's all I do. That's all my friends who are joining us later on today, that's all we do. And I think you can do it too. You can do it absolutely any age. So I love tigers. You know, if there's another animal that you love more than a tiger, whatever that might be, you should write a story about it. You know, whatever you love, that's what you should be writing about. So for me, I put the animal I love most. But when you are writing your story, you are totally allowed and indeed encouraged to write about whatever you most love, whatever you most enjoy. Put that into your story.
That's actually a very good starting point. Just take the animal and just start thinking about animal movements, characteristics, where they live, and then you can just sort of expand from there, can't you, in terms of that?
Absolutely.
We had a couple of questions because you've got some wonderful illustrations in this book, and obviously by Dave McKean. I've got a couple of questions here. Also, I want to show a couple of his illustrations, if that's okay, because they really are such a wonderful compliment to your writing, and they are. I know you worked with Dave, since your first book, I think, all the way through. So these are the questions. Westall Primary School, London. How closely do you work with Dave McKean? And St. Paul's Catholic Primary School, Northumberland. How important do you think illustrations are to telling stories themselves? So first question first, how closely do you work in terms of that? How does that work?
I mean, it's changed over the years. When I was doing my first book, Varjak Poor, Dave McKean was just one of my heroes. You know, I used to love the comics that he used to do back then, long time ago now. And when my publisher finally let me stop working on the words, he said, "What do you think about pictures? Who draws cats really well?" And I'd just seen a comic Dave had done. He was best known for comics then, with a cat going up and down a fire escape. I thought it was the best cat I'd ever seen. And so he said, "Yeah, I'll draw some cats for you." And I ended up working with one of my heroes, and he did all these incredible illustrations in the Varjak Poor books. I had almost nothing to do with that. We just gave him the words and it came back looking like that. But over the years that we've worked together, book after book, I've been really lucky to work with him on all my books. You know, we become friends as well as collaborators. So by the time we were doing Tyger, I was kind of collecting all sorts of material for him that I shared with him at the end, and we worked together quite closely. So, you know, when you open up Tyger and you go into the book, the first thing you see is this kind of map of London. Then you have these like Tyger paw prints that lead you into the story. And, you know, we put a lot of work and a lot of thought into just getting you into that story, into that world. So,
shall I show a couple of his pictures quickly from the book?
Please do.
Let me just get rid of this banner for a minute, and I'll show you a couple of pictures, and then you can talk us through these if you like, because there's a couple here, and you'll see they're absolutely beautiful pictures. So this is one of Dave's illustrations from the book. What's without giving too much away? What's this sort of illustrating? What point in the story is this?
This is one of my favorites. So this is when Adam first brings his friend Zadie to see the Tyger. He's found this impossible thing in a rubbish dump. in the middle of London where they live. There's a tiger in this rubbish dump where really there shouldn't be a tiger. Remember, this is a world where there are no tigers, so it's kind of unbelievable what he's found. So there they are in the background in the doorway, and there's the tiger. I just love that tiger. I
It's
think
beautiful. That
amazing.
it is
Also,
amazing. And here,
you know,
oh, sorry, go on, Karen.
just all those kind of, if you look at those kind of swirly patterns he's put in there, it's just so beautiful. Like the tree, there's a tree growing in the middle of this dump. So yeah, I mean, we worked together quite closely on this. The idea was that out there in the world, everything should feel very hard, very straight lines, almost like you're a little bit trapped. But then when you sort of come to be with the tiger, everything goes much more kind of swirly and organic, like it is there. So
There's
that's
another one here. This is obviously the on the back of the tiger. I think this they leading here or going towards the. I can't remember where this is in the story. This particular one.
well. Let's not have any spoilers, but let's just say it's quite a big
moment. Stairs. That's all you need to know.
It's quite a big moment in the story, but yeah, I just there's something to me when I see that picture, just something in me just lights up. I just think that's wonderful. What a thing.
It is a wonderful thing. So we go for you for a very short reading, and then we're going to come up with another couple more questions. And then after that, everybody, in probably about maybe 5 to 10 minutes time, we'll be joined by our Empathy Day authors. So I'll hand over to you now for a quick reading, if that's okay. Then we're back with a couple more questions, and then we continue from there. So this is Exercise with a little reading from The Wonderful Tiger.
Thank you so much. So I just want to read you a very short scene. This is the scene where Adam first sees the tiger. Remember, this is a world where almost all animals are extinct already. So, chapter 2. It was very dark in the ruined building, but as Adam looked up, his whole body shaking, he saw 2 points of light above him. The lights blinked like eyes, and then something erupted out of the darkness. Moving so fast, he saw only a blur at first, a streak of black and gold, leaping down from the roof beams to land on all 4 paws beside him. An animal, a gigantic animal, stood by his side, growling at the man with a knife. With one huge stride, she put herself between him and Adam. Then she threw back her head and roared, as if protecting Adam from the knife. The man screamed. He ran. He fled through the door he'd come in by and was gone. Adam couldn't run. The animal still stood between him and the door. He could only stand there, staring at her, senses filling with a sweet, high, musky scent, like honeysuckle growing wild. In her presence, everything else just melted away, even his fear. His skin was prickling and his eyes were wide, but inside him was a feeling stranger than fear. This animal had come down from the darkness to defend him. Why? What was she? A flash of lightning revealed more of her form. She was 10 feet long from her whiskers to her tail. So broad, she filled the doorway. Her fur was fiery gold with coal black stripes. Time seemed to stop as she turned to look at Adam, and Adam looked back at her. He could not look away. He had never been so close to any animal before, let alone one so huge and wild. Her eyes burned like liquid golden fire. They were shining with a light that was different to any light he had ever seen. Yet he thought he saw pain inside them too. And now that she was facing him, he could see she was wounded. There was blood on her fur, between her stripes, dripping wet and red. Whatever she was, this animal was wounded. And that is the scene where Adam first sees the tiger. Thank you very much. Yeah, she's wounded. She's in trouble. She might even be dying. But as he comes to see her again, and he brings Zadie to see her too, they begin to realize this is no ordinary tiger. The tiger has powers they can't begin to imagine. And as the tiger begins to show them that they also have powers, maybe this boy, this girl, and this tiger can change the world.
Read and find out. Let's go a couple more questions. That's wonderful. I love all that stuff. Okay. Illustrations we looked at. Here we go. Here's an interesting question. Excuse me. Cherry Tree Academy asks, we are growing a garden of vegetables and changing the world that way. How do you think your story has changed the world? Quite different.
Wow, I love that. That is
Yeah.
amazing. Well, I mean, often you don't know, as an author, you put something out into the world and you hope it's going to mean something to the people who read it. You hope it might stay with them and resonate. All I know is that the stories I loved myself when I was young, they did change my life. They stayed with me forever. I just want to show you one of them. So this is a book called Watership Down by a writer called Richard Adams. I read this when I was at primary school. I thought it was the best book ever. I couldn't stop reading it. I reread it for the first time when I was 35 years old, many, many, many years later. And I realized this book had shaped the way that I see the world. It really had changed me forever. So, yeah, I think the stories that you love when you are young are the most important ones you'll ever find in your whole life. They will change your life. And I don't know that books can change the world, but certainly people can change the world. And the books we love when we're young, they're the ones I think that they're the ones that matter most.
Well, that kind of links to this question, and it is true. Aldercourt High School, Derbyshire, what was your favourite children's book? And Town Junior School, Sutton Coldfield. What kind of books were you reading when you were 10 years old? I mean, Watership Down, you mentioned there as a classic, but one of the things you I think you mentioned in another interview as well was how children's books are, and they are right, they're not, they sort of start their children, but they are across all ages, really. Good children's books, and you go back to them when you're older, and you look at them from obviously an older set of eyes, where you get something different for them and could still understand it all. You know what I mean? So it appeals across different age ranges. And they're the best books. What sort of books have you picked up, apart from Watership Down, maybe now you're older, that you read when you were younger, that you think, actually, that speaks to me as much, but in a different way now than when I was a kid? What sort of books would you say did that for you?
In a way, I think rather than calling them children's books, we should really call them books for everyone, because I think, they're books you can read at any age, whoever you are. A book like Watership Down, at the age of 10, I would have seen that as a story about rabbits, as you can tell. It is a story about rabbits, but it's also a story about us, I think, really. But I only really understood that as an adult, that this was a story about human politics and philosophy and ecology. It seemed to contain everything. There are lots of other examples I can give you. There's a book called A Wizard of Earthsea by Ursula Le Guin. I think that's the best book I've ever read about magic. I say that as somebody who has enjoyed Harry Potter very much. This is the best. That's, again, a book I read every few years. Every time I read it, it seems to get richer and deeper and stronger. And I think a really great story is like that. I've mentioned a little bit earlier Philip Pullman's Dark Materials books. I didn't read that when I was at school because I hadn't been published yet. But I have read them a few times. And every time I read them again, they seem to, there's more. So I love this idea that there are stories that have layers and levels. And maybe each time you read them, you see something slightly different. You get something slightly different out of it. It's almost like the book is changing, but it's not. It's the same book. You are what is changing.
That's true. I'm going to have one more question for you, S, if that's okay, in just a sec. Very quickly, and then we're going to move on to the empathy day. But just really quickly, just on your point, I've just started. I read Lord of the Rings when I was younger, and I've just started reading it to my son.
Wow!
Obviously, you've seen the films and all the rest of it, which are great. But what's wonderful about it, and this is the same with many adaptations of books and into films and stuff, is that not only is the world bigger in the book, but you also get something completely different from that experience. Not to sort of push aside the films at all, but you obviously get a much richer understanding of it. And as you get older, that me reading it again now, I can see, because I haven't read it since I was, 12. I can see so much more in it in a different way, and it's a wonderful thing to do. So I would encourage all the children watching, you find those books, keep them on a shelf, pick them up again in 10 years and 10 years after that, and you'll always get something from it. So one last question, just a quick answer, if I may, for this one. This is so Joe's at the work school in Salford. If you had to live in one of your books, which book would you choose?
Wow. Yeah. I mean, actually, things are never easy for the characters in my books. It seems like in all my books, the characters learn that they have powers. I seem to keep writing stories about characters with powers, but the powers seldom make their lives easier. In fact, they usually make their lives more difficult and more dangerous, and they have to learn how to use these powers, which can be quite hard for them. So I'm not sure that I would necessarily choose to live in any of them, because they're pretty hard. But if I had to choose one, I mean, I certainly wouldn't want to live in the world of Tyger. I think that's a very, very dark, dystopian kind of a world. But I am beginning to think now about a story that I think is almost like the mirror image of Tyger. It's almost like a mirror world. And right now, that's the new thing I'm working on. I've only been working on it for 1 year, which for me is nothing. So I can't tell you too much
Another
about
8
it.
to go.
But so far, I would say that, yeah, I'm trying to imagine a utopia rather than a dystopia this time.
Yeah.
And that is the world I would want to live in. I'm trying to imagine the best possible world, which is really interesting. I mean, it's a really interesting thing to ask yourself. Not only how could our world be better, but if you were in charge of the world, how would it be? How would you have things?
Yes, and that's another interesting one kids can talk about today. If you get started on your animal ideas for stories, and if you're in charge of the world, what's your top 5 things you're trying to address straight away, which is quite an interesting one as well. We'll speak to you all day, of course. Lovely to want to. We're going to be bringing you back into the show a bit later on, but for now, can we please all put our hands together? And a huge thank you from me to you for that. And we'll speak to you later on. Round of applause, Mr. SF Science. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Cheers. So there we go. SF Side, they're talking about the wonderful Tyger, of course. Now, in a moment, I'll be introducing you to our Empathy Day authors. So Empathy Day, of course, is on in 2 weeks on the 8th of June. And a part of this year's Empathy Day is the Mission Empathy Day Challenge. And there's 5 things that Empathy Day are asking you to do. We won't be talking about all of them today, but we'll be looking a little bit about number 1, Empathy Power Reads with our authors, and number 5, making an empathy resolution. If you want to find out a bit more about these and download any of the resources from that, you can go to empathylab.co.uk and you get your free Empathy Day resources from then if you go to that link, which is fantastic. Now, our Empathy Day authors, as part of Empathy Day, we have a 2023 Read for Empathy collection. There's about 65 books in there from 3 to 16-year-olds, including picture books, novels, poetry, non-fiction, graphic novels, which have themes that help build an understanding of the importance and practice of empathy. And my next 4 guests have books included on that list. So can you please put the hands together as we welcome to Mr. Dilly Meets? We're going to start with Nicola Davies. Hello, Nicola. Polly O'Yen. Hello, Polly. Tom Percival. Hello, Tom. And Stewart Foster. Hello, Stewart. Give yourselves a big round of applause. A big round of applause. And give all the kids a big wave, which is a lovely thing. Lovely to have you all on today. Now, we have a little bit of a challenge for our lovely guests today. So I'm not going to fill them with fear too much. And they each have, as I said, a book as part of the Read for Empathy 2023. Now, we don't have time to have a 20 minutes interview each with all of them. So they're going to do something. You might have played a game at school called Just a Minute, where you speak for a minute continuously on a subject. Now, they each have one of their books. So we're going to start with Polly in a moment. Then we're going to go to Stewart. Then we're going to go to Nicola and then to Tom. And they're going to be full on the screen. I'll then have a minute on my timer here to talk about their empathy read. No pressure at all for all of you. How are you all feeling? Feeling pretty confident?
I'm glad to
Yeah, sorry, Polly, you have a quick question.
Oh, I said I think I'm glad to go first. I'm going to bumble and burble for a minute, so get ready.
I do all the time, so that's all good. So listen, so as I said, we're going to Polly. When it finishes, Polly, I'll basically come on. I say time up. You'll come off, and then I'm going to go straight to you, Stewart, and then Nicola, and then Tom after that. Is that all good? Fantastic. So get yourself ready. I don't know if you need to do any vocal warm-ups, any of you, or any stretching, or anything like that. But we speak to you in just a moment. So here we go. So I will give you, Polly, it's over to you. I'm going to remove myself from the link. I'm going to give you 1 minute to talk about The Boy Who Grew a Tree.
now. Hi, so I'm Polly. I wrote The Boy Who Grew a Tree, and this is all about this little chap, Timmy. He might seem quite an ordinary guy, I suppose, but he actually has this kind of superpower, but not like the superpowers that those superheroes have in movies. He has a very particular kind of one where he actually cares and notices and is curious about nature wherever he can find it. So he has a windowsill at home where he looks after little seedlings that he tends to. As he's walking around the street, he notices things that most of us will probably just walk straight past, but he stops and values and notices nature. So when he discovers a tiny seedling that's growing in a place that it really shouldn't be, in an abandoned library, he is the one who cares and tends for it. But it's not any ordinary kind of tree. It's a magic tree.
Time up.
And it's growing really fast.
You did great. Round of applause. Let's be really fast. Polly, that was a great start. Well done. I hope that wasn't too much pressure. So
I had the baton on. Thank you.
That was very, very baton on. We're going to go now, and we're going to bring in Stewart Foster. So, hello, Stewart. How's it going?
Poor Polly having to go first.
I know. So listen, Stewart, you've got a minute. Okay, I'm going to hand over to you to talk about your empathy read, and that starts.
My goodness, the pressure of this. Hi, I'm Stewart Foster, author of Can You Feel the Noise? This is about a 11-year-old girl called Sophie, and she goes deaf overnight. She's a musician, and when she wakes up the next morning, she has to relearn her life, but also how to relearn how to play music. And the rest of the story is about the challenges that she faces, and will she ever be able to get back on stage and play music again? How was that?
That's 30 seconds, Stuart. That's 30 seconds.
That's very good.
Talk about
I'm that good.
30 seconds.
You should also get involved with her friends as well, because the power of the book is actually in the power of friendship. So if she loves Sophie, you'll end up loving her friends and how they support her on her journey.
I think that'll do. Round of applause to Stuart. Thank you very much, Stuart. I'll speak to you in just a moment. So next up, we have Nicola Davies. Okay, Nicola, are we ready? So we're going to give you.
Absolutely.
You probably got a bit of excess time there because Stuart. I mean.
No, I won't be so mean as to use up somebody else's time. That's not fair.
So, Nicola, here we go. So we've got 1 minute to talk about. This is how change begins. We're going to start now.
So this is how the change begins. Is a book of. Be helpful to have it the right way around. Is a book of poems. It's a book about empathy for the planet, empathy for other species, and it's about change. And all change begins in here and in here. And that's what I hope the poems in this book will do. Will help to change people's minds, change people's hearts. These are poems to carry around with you in your head and see how they change you and change your ideas as you carry them around. There's one little riff in here that I grew up with, and it goes like this. Little drops of water, little grains of sand, make the mighty ocean and the promised land. And I've added to that. Little drops of water, little grains of sand, make the mighty ocean and the promised land. We are but drops of water, we are but grains of sand, but together we're an ocean. We can make a promised land.
Fantastic, and on time as well. That was very, 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 very professional. Fantastic. Okay, we're going to go to Tom now, and then we're going to bring you all in together. Thanks, Nicola. So let's get Tom in. Hello, Tom.
Okay. Hello.
I put your name, but instead you're not Nicola Davies. So let's put Tom up. So Tom, we're going to go for 1 minute to talk about your empathy read, which is the wonderful picture book, The River. So over to you now, Tom.
All right, brilliant. So, The River is a book that I wrote, and it is what I wrote and illustrated, because I do both. So it's about a boy called Rowan, and he starts off with his dog Atlas, who is his very best friend. And Rowan lives in the countryside, and he just loves being in the countryside. He loves exploring. He loves nature. He loves the river by his house, and sometimes the river can be quiet and calm. And other times it can be light and playful, just like Rowan can. Sometimes the river can be wild and angry, just like Rowan. And the river represents Rowan's emotions and how he feels. And then sadly, halfway through the book, Rowan's dog Atlas dies, at which point the river freezes over, and then the river stays frozen through the summer, through to the next autumn, and it only changes when he finds in the undergrowth an injured bird. And it's what happens next that enables Rowan to recover.
Fantastic, Tom. Look at that. Brought it in on time again. Fantastic. That's great stuff. So, Tom and everyone else, we're going to speak to you all in just a moment. I'm just going to hear from some children from Moorfields Primary School. We're going to be talking about the empathy resolutions. And then we'll be back with all our panel, including SF Side, for our empathy panel a bit later on. So let's have a quick listen to the children from Moorfields Primary School about their Empathy Day resolutions this year.
Empathy is important as you can understand people's point of view.
I also think empathy is important because you can understand people more and you can relate to them.
I think empathy is really important because you can relate to other people's situations and situations that you might never encounter in your lifetime.
It's nice to understand if there's a character in a book, what they're going through.
My empathy resolution is every time I go past a homeless person to smile at them or say hello to them, because sometimes they don't want to just get a home or some money. They just want a relationship with somebody because they're always alone on the streets all the time.
I came up with an empathy resolution, and it was to be thoughtful and listen to people when they are making comments and ideas.
My empathy resolution is to understand other people's situations and have empathy for them and really think what some people go through.
So thank you to the children of Moorfields Academy for that video, Empathy Lab, for letting me let me share that as well. So fantastic. So let's welcome back all the authors, and we're going to talk about Empathy Day and our empathy resolutions and what's a couple of other questions now. So let me welcome back Nicola Davies, Polly Oyen, Tom Percival, SF Side, and Stewart Foster. Thank you very much. Wonderful, those children, what they had to say there. It's always lovely to hear kids just come out and say it raw as it is. So Empathy Day, obviously in a couple of weeks' time, must be fantastic to have all your books included on that list. Just first of all, how does that kind of work? Do you put books forward for that, or is that kind of do you get people in touch with you? How does that kind of work? So let's go from Nicola, then Polly, Stewart, SF, and Tom. So Nicola, how does that kind of work in terms of getting a book on that kind of list?
It just happens. It's a magic thing. It descends from the sky like rain. I've no idea. It's a mysterious process, like all things in publishing.
So it happens. What about, is it the same for all of you, or did you put?
Yeah, you just receive a lovely email and you go, yay.
That sounds good. Do you have, in terms of because obviously, so the books, your books, all of them have at their heart, obviously, empathy contained within their characters or in the story or in the setting of how you've written your books. Was that a conscious thing for all of you, or do you just think that in order to write a good character, a good story, that understand that empathy is important in that? So if I go to you, Tom, first of all, what do you think about that in terms of writing a character? Does it have to, do you write it with sort of an empathy in mind, or do you just think it's a very important thing for characters?
Yeah, I mean, for me personally, I just, the only reason that like SF said earlier, I write books largely because it's an extension of the experience of reading a book, and you want to kind of inhabit a world more kind of as deeply as you can. And I feel that creating any book is a form of communication, and to communicate, you have to have empathy, because you have to understand your characters. You have to see from the perspectives of characters who might not be particularly nice. It's essential to any form of storytelling, I feel.
Absolutely. What about you, Stewart, in terms of that for your book? Would you echo what Tom said, or add anything to that?
I tell you what, I always think is that if you actually set out to make something empathetic or have empathy, then I don't think it's going to be very good. I think you have to love the characters first and have the story build around them. And in particular, I grew up with a TV series called Grange Hill, and that I learned so much. I saw SF laugh at that. I learned so much from that program, and my books are very much based in that real situations. And I do think that we learn how to behave and react by seeing how others do it, and that's the best way of doing it.
Absolutely. Polly, what about yourself on that in terms of using empathy or just how do you make characters relatable in terms of that for kids?
I think like empathy and reading are just so intermingled. Like if when you're reading, your brain is lighting up to live that life with that character. It's like you are actively empathizing by reading. And so the same happens when you're writing. I certainly didn't set out to think I want this book to be empathetic, but by connecting with that character and really thinking yourself into that character's shoes, as Tom says, it just gives you that same sort of superpower that you get from reading, but in this very very concentrated way. It's brilliant. Everyone should read.
Everyone should. Estef, what about yourself in terms of that? You mentioned a bit about that earlier in our interview and stuff. But what about yourself?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with everything everybody's saying. One thing that I often do, even though I really like books that are all from one character's point of view, so that I can kind of become the main character, I feel, and so that's how all my books are written, I feel it's really important for me as a writer to really understand all the characters. So I'll often write scenes from multiple points of view just for myself. I'll do it in first person. So even the evil characters, I have to kind of become them too. And really understand, well, why are they doing these awful things that they're doing? Everyone has a story, right? And in a way, isn't this what stories are for, to help us imagine things from other points of view?
Absolutely. And what about yourself, Nicola?
Well, poetry is a bit, I write fiction, and I totally agree with everything everybody else has been saying about characters and how imagining them brings empathy. But poetry is different, because poetry, part of the function of poetry is to think things through. So a poem is a thought. It's a line of thought, and it's a line of feeling. So you have to be looking two ways when you write a poem. You're not just looking at your subject. You're very much looking out at your readers and empathizing with your readers. And certainly this collection, This Is How the Change Begins, I was really thinking about my readers and how difficult it is for young people having to cope with a world where so much is going on, where climate change is happening, and yet they see the grown-ups around them doing absolutely nothing about it. So for me, it was an act of empathy with their fear and their anger, and to give them a channel for those emotions, a useful channel for those emotions that would then create change in the world.
Well, that kind of leads on to the next question. Really, you all just touched on it. Actually, was about the the power that obviously mankind has been telling stories since sitting around a campfire, many thousands of years ago. And we get our stories in all different kind of ways now, of varying quality. I think a lot of it from TV and film, again, of varying quality. But a good story, as you said, can make you feel empathy and see things, encourage a wider view of the world, see things in a different way in terms of that. In writing your own characters, is there anything that you kind of made you look at things in a different way? So like you look at it and you go, I'm going to have to do a bit of research about, I don't know, this particular aspect or this bit. And then suddenly you think, actually, that's completely, maybe think something so differently from what I had in my mind. So preconceptions about stuff. And what about you? So, what about yourself, Stewart, in terms of that? Is there anything that's kind of really sort of jarred you as you?
I definitely had that in a book that I wrote called All the Things That Go Wrong, which is about two perspectives, a bully and the boy being bullied. And when I was writing the bully, trying to understand why he was doing what he was doing and not liking him for 6 chapters was awful. And then all of a sudden, I worked out why he was doing what he was doing. And he wrote a letter to his brother saying how much he missed his brother. And all of a sudden, I can remember going to bed that night thinking, oh my God, I really like Dan now. I understand what he's doing. And I really learned something from that, is that, bully's bully for a reason in that particular, and I learned why then. And that was a great thing for me.
That's amazing. It's an amazing way to sort of, yes, I'm sorry, it doesn't matter what age you're at, you can look at things from a different perspective and get a new understanding. So what about yourself, Tom? Is anything you've written that's kind of done that, or taken something that's maybe quite a difficult issue and then having to sort of like try and get that down into a sort of a simple way where it's definitely not a simple thing for kids? Any of those two things ring true in any of your books at all, do you think?
Who was that to?
Tom,
Sorry.
Tom, yeah, Tom.
Me.
Yeah, Tom. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, well, funnily enough, like, exactly the same as Stuart. Actually, I mean, not in the river, but in a book that I'm working on at the moment, which is a fiction story. Very similar scenario. It was derived from a short story that I'd submitted to a publisher, and then we've kind of extended it into a longer form book. And it started off with a bully character who was just like an absolute swine, and and like just out and out dark. And then as I was expanding the short story, I was like, well, like this guy, he just doesn't, he feels very thin, and I was expanding on his character, and then exactly as Stuart said, I'm like, oh no, like now I feel really bad for him because I understand exactly why he's doing these awful things. I'm not saying that I like those things or I would do them, but I can see why he did. And ultimately, we are all we are the result of everything that's happened to us.
Sure,
and if you have negative encounters, then you start to behave in a negative way. And so fundamentally, that's why I think most people behave badly. And yes, that's what I found over the course of my writing. And that's what I sort of try to hopefully do with my writing, is to understand that we all do bad things, forgive ourselves that, and hopefully move forward more positively in the future.
Absolutely. What great message there for today, especially about Empathy Day. Polly, I put the same question to you, and then Nicola, then SF, and then we're going to talk about your empathy resolutions as well. So Polly, over to you.
Yeah, so I was just thinking as we were talking, this book is actually based on a boy that I used to teach, and he was often like very sort of slow at coming in at playground, after playtime, that kind of thing, and we'd be like, come on, get in the line, because you're like, come on, we've got all these things we have to do, and he would be kind of stopping, looking at something, and it would be quite annoying. And then we realized, me as a teacher and the other grown-ups in the school, that he was actually stopping to look at a ladybird on a leaf, or an ant on the making its way through the maze of the tarmac. And it was because he was so absolutely kind of entranced and totally focused on this detail, which was what was stopping him from following our rules. Just that, we see that all the time, especially like as an adult, when we're imposing our timetable on kids or on our family, and actually slowing down and seeing like the beauty that's all around us. I think children are just amazing to connect with all the time. It was a real eye opener for me.
I think you're taking that is notice things. Look at them. We and this is sort of a cliche word, but we often look but don't see. And obviously that's often, but it is very much the case, especially now with everything so fast around you, and for children watching, for all of us actually, but for children watching, there's so much coming at them, whereas when we were younger, maybe not quite as much, and so much to absorb and sort of figure out your own sort of path through that. And that's what the wonderful things about stories can do, I guess, is that they can help show you not just your way and highlight that, but other people's ways, and give us perspective on that. So Nicola, over to you about that question, and then SF, and then as I said, we could to empathy resolution.
I think when you're writing, we've all talked about writing baddies actually, quite a few, because you discover more when you're thinking about people who are not like you. And when the funny thing about writing is, it doesn't feel like you're inventing these people, does it? It feels like they're there in front of you, and you have got to observe them and understand them. And that's the time-consuming process. And in that observation and that kind of peeling back of the layers, it's like a relationship with a real human being, where your first impression is very different from your final understanding. And they may change also through that process. And there has to be, for all characters, even the baddest baddie, who you want to do the really horrible things, the really dramatically horrible things in your book, there has to be a possibility of change and redemption, because there is that possibility for all of us. And also, fiction would be very boring if there wasn't that possibility.
Absolutely. And SF, for the final word on that, anything you'd like to say on that?
I mean, one thing I would like to say is I think empathy can extend not only to all your fellow human beings, but also to non-humans. It's so important. We live in a totally interconnected and interdependent world. So I've done a lot of research for example, when writing Tyger, like, what is the world like to a tiger? You know, when I was doing Varjak, I did a lot of research into what is the world like to a cat. It's totally different to what it's like to a human. So I think it is really important to just try and get outside of yourself. And yes, research can really help with that, for sure.
Fantastic. Well, it's amazing insight then back to your thoughts and ideas about stories and characters. And I'm sure there's a lot of inspiration there for the children watching as well. Empathy resolutions, I'm going to talk about a little bit after we say goodbye. I spoke about it earlier. And I was asked by Empathy Day to ask, what are your empathy resolutions in a sense? So I'll go back to Nicola first, so then Polly, Stewart, SF, and then Tom, last with you. So Nicola, do you have an empathy resolution as such in anything?
Slow down and pay attention.
Slow down and pay attention. Great.
Slow down and pay attention, not to not always listen to the noise inside my own head, but pay attention to what's going on around me.
We're all nodding.
That's the first step, isn't it? To be able to understand what's going on.
I just realized
you just stop, look, think.
It is. I just say the other day on that note, I don't know who said this. It said, if you can find a bit of, they didn't say it well, but if you can find a bit of stillness, is that there's the sort of noisy bit in your head.
Yeah.
He said, but the thing that always comes, it comes from the whisper. It's the quiet voice in there. So you have to allow time for that to sort of come out.
Yeah.
You know?
I'm always telling kids, ideas are like little quiet bubbles.
Yeah.
But you need to learn to make your head quiet. So
that's
that you
absolutely right. Polly, what about yourself?
I think I want Nicola Davies to live in my pocket or in my ear. That's my new resolution. Trying to make that happen.
Be very messy,
yeah.
But I had this sort of vague resolution. I wanted to be actively curious in the world. And then I was like, this is too woolly and too fluffy. So I broke it down into two things, which was to go beyond small talk. I think so often when we catch up with someone, we go, hi, how are you? How are you? How are you? And actually really taking that time to feel like we're connecting and listening and kind of holding is much harder than it sounds. And then the second part of it was just to keep reading. There's nothing better.
But it's very true that just pick up that listening increasingly is a very hard thing to do. And to be able to be good at listening to other people, but listening in sense of not just speaking, but in terms of like feeling where they're coming from and getting a sense of that is it's a wonderful skill to develop and stuff. Stewart, what about yourself?
I'm echoing the two of them, but I've also said I think it's all about talking about your feelings and not bottling things up. And I certainly make an effort in schools now where I used to talk for 50 minutes solid, and I will shut up after 20 minutes and I will ask them what they think and what they're talking about, because there's a lot going on in the world, and I think it's good that people get to talk about how they're feeling.
Fantastic. SF, what about yourself?
Yeah, resolution. Like, you know, I make a new one every year for Empathy Day. This year, I mean, my feeling is the single biggest thing I can do to kind of increase my empathy is to read more, like Polly was saying, you know. So I'm resolving this year to try and read a book every week, like a minimum of one book a week. I want to read as many books as I can. I think one book a week is an achievable resolution. If I tried to do one a day, I would probably never do that. But if I can do one a week, I think that's going to just expand my understanding and my knowledge and my empathy for other people and indeed non-humans. So that's my resolution this year.
Fantastic. And lastly, Tom, what about yourself?
Yeah, again, mine is just to listen, but as you said, actively listen to, have conversations with people, and when that happens, to really consider what they are saying, and not necessarily what they're just saying, but the kind of subtext of what they might actually be getting at. And as Polly said, to kind of try to get to a point where you're having more meaningful conversations through actively listening to what the people that you're communicating with are actually saying, and then allow hopefully an open and honest discourse to happen that potentially both parties or all parties involved in the conversation can hopefully learn from. So actively listening will be mine.
I can't thank you all enough for joining me today. You've all been absolutely wonderful. I hope you've enjoyed yourselves. Good luck with all your wonderful books, and whatever you're doing for Empathy Day in half times next week, but 2 weeks time. give each other a big round of applause. I'll give you a big round of applause as well.
Hey, bravo.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much, everyone. So, Tom Percival, thank you very much, sir. Goodbye, my friend. Polly Ho-Yen, thank you very much. Goodbye, Polly. And Nicola Davies, thank you, Nicola. Stewart Foster, thank you, Stewart. And wonderful SF Syed, absolute pleasure speaking to you. Thank you very much, SF Syed. Give them all a big round of applause across the country there. Before we go, a couple of other things. There was a sound issue at the beginning of the program. My computer decided to knock the sound out, which is why you couldn't hear me, but you could hear the music. So I do apologise for that. But we got there in the end, which was great. As I said, Mission Empathy. If you go to the Empathy Lab website, which is here again, empathylab.co.uk, you can download your free Empathy Day resources and find out more about all our authors' books and the other books on the Reading for Empathy challenge that is coming up. But that's it, my friends. Next month we have a summer special, end of June. I haven't got anything to show you on that other than trying to remember some of the guests. We've got Jamie Littler on there, Jenny McLaughlin, Jenny Pearson, Phil Earl, all sorts of people on that. So look out for that. And that's another free event coming for you at the end of June. But for now, can you please put your hands together? Give me a big round of applause for my wonderful guests, Polly Ho-Yen, SF Syed, Tom Percival, Stewart Foster, Nicola Davies. That's all of them, I think. Wonderful for joining in today. My name is Mr. Dilly. You've been, as usual, a wonderful audience. Thanks for all joining in. If you're watching us on catch up, do enjoy. Do tweet about it. And if you go to YouTube, the Mr. Dilly channel there with all the previous Mr. Dilly Meets on there. Last month's Emma Carroll and Natasha Farron is on there as well. But for now, it's goodbye from me, my friends. Thanks for joining us. And it's goodbye from me. Goodbye. Goodbye.